Elias lay motionless, barely breathing, as the cold seeped into his bones. His wrists were raw, the bonds biting into his skin. His body ached from the brutal treatment, but the pain only fueled his determination. His mind worked rapidly, calculating. They had made a critical mistake, underestimating the human spirit. The noose had been a formality, a ritual to them, but he was still alive. And alive meant dangerous. The village was quiet now, save for the occasional flicker of the ceremonial fires and the deep, rhythmic chants of the aliens. Their voices filled the night, strange and guttural. Elias didn't care about their chants. He cared about survival. He cared about getting out. He tested his restraints again. The bonds held firm, but there was a slight give. They hadn't secured him as tightly as they thought. His hands were numb from lack of circulation, but he could feel enough to fight. He just had to stay calm. The sounds of movement reached his ears, and he stilled. One of them was coming closer. A low growl, like the sound of a beast in the distance, echoed from beyond the firelight. He had no time to waste. He had to act before they came back. Elias shifted his body, pulling one arm to his chest, forcing the rope against the rough stone. The fibers frayed slowly, the fibers that had been used to tie him now becoming his focus. His muscles screamed, but he resisted the urge to rush. Every move had to be precise, every breath controlled. They had trapped him, but they hadn't broken him. Not yet. The rope began to loosen. He gritted his teeth, ignoring the biting pain in his arms. Another twist, another strain, and finally, with a sharp snap, the rope gave way. He fell forward, landing heavily on his knees. For a moment, his vision swam, the adrenaline crash making his head spin. But he couldn't afford weakness. He forced himself to stand. The world swayed, but he stayed on his feet. A quick look around confirmed that he was still alone. The warriors were distracted. They had no idea he had escaped. Elias moved swiftly, using the cover of shadows to navigate through the village. His heart pounded in his chest, but he knew that if he was going to survive, he had to keep moving. There was no room for hesitation. His mind raced through the plan. He had to find his weapons. His rifle. His gear. They were key to everything. He could fight back. He would fight back. He crept through the dimly lit village, ducking behind huts and weaving through the trees. Every noise, every rustle of leaves, made him freeze, listening for the slightest hint of danger. He couldn't afford to be careless. His eyes locked onto the altar. There, at the center of the camp, sat his rifle, his lifeline. It gleamed under the moonlight, an impossible sight after everything he had been through. But it was real. His heart quickened, and he moved faster. The soldiers were still busy with their revelry, unaware of the threat slipping into their midst. Elias approached the altar. His fingers brushed the cold metal of his weapon, and for the first time since being captured, he allowed himself a moment of relief. The hunt was far from over. This time, he was the one who would be doing the hunting. Elias awoke to the feeling of rough fibers biting into his wrists. His arms were suspended above him, his body weak but intact. His gear was gone. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something acrid, something ancient. The village surrounded him, if it could even be called that. The structures were neither crude nor primitive. Towering spires of woven bone and dark metal rose above the clearing, their surfaces etched with glowing red glyphs. Fires burned in deep pits, casting flickering shadows across the assembled crowd. They were waiting for something. The largest of them stepped forward, the war chief. His armor was adorned with countless scars, each one deliberate, carved into the plating as if recording victories. His gaze was unreadable, but his presence was suffocating. This was not just a warrior. This was a ruler. A guttural voice filled the air. Not the war chief, but an elder, frail yet commanding, draped in ceremonial skins that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. She raised a hand, and the crowd fell silent. Elias forced himself to stay still, to assess. These people had technology. Not in the way humans did, not sleek and sterile, but raw, organic, something symbiotic with the planet itself. His capture had not been random. This was a ritual. A judgment. The elder gestured, and the war chief spoke. The language was harsh, syllables grinding against one another, But Elias caught something buried beneath the alien cadence. Sky beasts. The words repeated, the crowd hissing in agreement. He didn't understand the full context, but the message was clear. He was being accused. Another human had been here before, and they had left behind something worse than bodies. The elder lifted a staff, its tip pulsating with a strange energy. A projection flickered into existence above her, a distorted memory, grainy but unmistakable. Human soldiers in battle armor, their rifles cutting down unarmed aliens, their voices cold, efficient. The same voices he had heard in his own command channels. His stomach twisted. He had never been to this world before, but he recognized what this was. A failed diplomatic mission. A massacre. The elder pointed at him, then at the noose. It didn't matter that he wasn't one of them. It didn't matter that he hadn't fired those shots. He was human. That was enough. The war chief stepped forward, tightening the rope in his hands. The crowd's chant grew, rising in tempo, in fervor. Elias pulled against his bindings, but there was no give, no escape. Then, a flicker of movement. Among the gathered warriors, a single figure stood apart. Small, slight, different. A girl, barely into adulthood by their standards, her eyes locked onto him. There was no rage in her expression, only something else. Hesitation. Doubt. For the first time, Elias saw a fracture in their conviction. But it wasn't enough. The war chief raised the noose, stepping toward him with deliberate finality. The judgment had been made. Elias took a slow breath, forcing his mind to stillness. His body was spent, his weapons gone, but if he had learned one thing in his years of war, it was this. Death was never absolute. And this would not be the end. Elias kept his head down, his movements deliberate as he moved deeper into the chaos he had orchestrated. The panic among the aliens was palpable, their disciplined ranks splintering into frantic, disorganized groups. They had lost their advantage. Confusion was his ally now. The war chief had gathered a small contingent, still rallying the stragglers. Their leader wasn't foolish. He knew exactly what was happening. But he was too late. Elias moved like a shadow, darting from one patch of cover to the next. His breathing was steady, controlled. He couldn't afford to rush. Every step had to be calculated. He had one shot at this, and failure wasn't an option. He needed them to be on the move. The war chief would be the key to breaking their morale. He had to get close enough to strike before they could regroup. The next shot was a warning. Not a kill. Just a clean strike to the chest of one of the warriors. The alien dropped instantly, but the body didn't make a sound. The others didn't notice the first moment of death. They didn't see it coming. But they felt it. The tension thickened, fear building. Elias had done this before. When fear sets in, leadership cracks. And with that crack, the foundation of the tribe would crumble. The war chief howled in frustration, his voice like the roar of a beast. He rallied his remaining warriors, ordering them into a loose formation. But it was too late. He was already surrounded. Elias stepped out of cover, using the chaos to mask his position, his rifle aimed at the war chief. But there was no clear shot, not yet. The chief's bodyguards moved too quickly, closing the distance, protecting their leader. Elias adjusted his stance, waiting. He could feel their eyes searching for him. They could sense something was off. The aliens were closing in, hunting the source of the chaos. But Elias had no intention of running. The game had changed. The hunter had become the hunted, and now he would turn the tables. A roar sounded in the distance. A distraction. One of the warriors had found a decoy, a small explosive charge hidden in the underbrush. The blast sent a shockwave through the camp. It didn't kill anyone, but it was enough to send more of the aliens scattering, giving Elias the opening he needed. He struck. The first shot rang out, a loud crack of thunder in the still night air. The war chief's bodyguard dropped without a sound, the shot precise, aimed for the heart. The war chief faltered, but he recovered quickly, barking orders for his remaining forces to advance. Elias ducked behind cover again, the adrenaline coursing through his veins. He didn't have time for hesitation. He had to keep moving, stay unpredictable. The war chief was nearing his position, and Elias couldn't allow him to get any closer. One misstep, and all of this could fall apart. He moved again, staying low to the ground, watching as the war chief and his warriors began to close in. The rifle felt like an extension of his arm. He knew the trajectory of each bullet before pulling the trigger. His shots were calculated, ruthless. Another warrior fell. Another shot. The sound of the rifle echoed through the air, and the war chief's warriors were no longer confident. Fear had taken hold. Panic was spreading faster than Elias could make them pay for it. They were crumbling. The war chief's face twisted with rage as he spotted Elias' movements. He shouted something, barking orders to retreat. But it was already too late. The momentum had shifted entirely in Elias' favor. The fear was too great, and the war chief had lost control of his pack. Elias fired again, his aim true, hitting the war chief's second-in-command square in the chest. The alien fell backward, the momentum pushing him into the dirt. The remaining warriors stopped, their weapons now lowered in hesitation. Elias was no longer hunting them, they had become the prey. The war chief looked around in desperation, seeing his forces collapse one by one, not knowing where the next shot would come from. His command was failing. The myth of their superiority had shattered in a matter of moments. Elias moved once more, closing the distance, bringing the rifle up to his shoulder. The war chief stood alone now, fury in his eyes, but his resolve was slipping. Elias took a breath, steadied his aim, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out. The war chief fell to the ground, lifeless, his reign ended. It was over. The tribe was broken. Their arrogance had cost them everything. And Elias had proven once again that humanity was not to be underestimated. The camp was silent now, save for the faint crackle of dying fires and the distant soft rustling of the wind through the trees. Elias stood amidst the wreckage of the alien warriors, his chest heaving as the adrenaline began to wear off. The rifle still felt like an extension of his arm, his fingers tightening around it almost instinctively. He had won. The tribe had been broken, their leaders fallen, and their warriors scattered. But there was no victory dance, no moment of triumph. There was only the harsh reality of survival, and the cold, undeniable truth that this would not be the last battle. The alien bodies lay strewn across the camp, victims of Elias' precision, each one a testament to their mistake in underestimating him. The last of the war chief's soldiers had been slain, their weapons useless against the calculated onslaught Elias had unleashed. He didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. The world wasn't kind enough for that. He scanned the camp, his eyes falling on the scattered alien technology, their weapons, their tools. Some of it could be useful, but most of it was beyond his understanding. Still, he took what he could, stripping away the trinkets and tools that might help him in the future. Survival wasn't just about fighting, it was about adaptability, learning, and using whatever resources you could. His thoughts drifted back to the girl, the one who had freed him from the noose. She had risked everything to get him out. He couldn't imagine why she had done it. Her tribe had been ready to hang him, to leave him as nothing more than a trophy for their amusement. But she had chosen him. And now, he owed her. Her survival would be his next mission. He found her not far from the camp, hiding in the shadows, watching him with cautious eyes. She had seen him fight, seen him turn the tide in a battle that had been hers to lose. But there was more to this than just the fight. It had always been about more than survival. She had shown him an unexpected mercy, and Elias couldn't leave her to face the same fate as the others. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and steady. She regarded him for a moment, a silent war of indecision playing out in her eyes. She had every reason to distrust him, every reason to turn him away. But then, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, a subtle shift of the head. Together, they made their way through the wreckage. The camp, once filled with alien life, was now eerily empty. The fires flickered weakly, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch across the land. It was a world of death, and yet, Elias could feel a new purpose rising in him. This wasn't over. It was far from over. The girl moved with quiet determination, her eyes scanning the horizon as though expecting more danger to appear at any moment. Elias felt it too. The battle may have been won, but there were still others out there. More tribes, more warriors. This world was filled with conflict, and the hunt was never truly finished. "I don't know how you survived," Elias said, breaking the silence. "But I'm glad you did." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable, before speaking in a language he couldn't understand. He had learned enough of their tongue to grasp fragments, but not enough to hold a conversation. He knew, though, that she wasn't afraid. She wasn't a simple victim. She was a survivor. They moved deeper into the forest, the faint glow of the destroyed camp fading behind them. Elias didn't know where they were going, or what came next. He didn't have a plan, not really. All he knew was that, for the first time in a long while, he wasn't alone. He had a companion, someone who had defied her own people for him. It was an uneasy alliance, but it was an alliance nonetheless. The quiet stretching between them felt heavy, like there were words unsaid, secrets lingering in the air. But Elias didn't press. The girl had already shown more trust than he deserved. He wouldn't ask for more than she was willing to give. As the moon rose high above the trees, casting an ethereal light over the forest floor, Elias paused. He turned back toward the camp, the wreckage of the alien warriors a testament to the price of underestimating humanity. His thoughts flickered to Earth, to the people he had left behind. He had been sent to this world to scout, to find out what made these aliens tick, what made them strong, and what made them vulnerable. Now, he had the answer. But more than that, he had the will to survive, the will to fight back, and the knowledge that he was capable of much more than just being a soldier. He was a survivor. And now so was she. In this strange, brutal world, they had both found their strength. They would need it. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin again.